This is Beyond the Shot, an essay written by Sergei Eisenstein in 1929, which almost 100 years after its publication is still one of the most widely read and studied in universities and film schools across the globe. However, we have been reading it wrong all this time. It must be clarified that the problem is not in the text itself nor in its translations. So why have we read it the wrong way, at least in the West? Well, the short answer is the text is incomplete. Join me today to discover what is that essential element missing when reading this well-known and fundamental work about film montage, Chinese and Japanese ideograms, Japanese poetry, Japanese cinema, and of course the great opportunity that all the above, according to Eisenstein, represented for Soviet cinema too. My name is Javier, and this is a channel on art house film and author films. Let's get into it. Sergei Eisenstein's Beyond the Shot is one of the most famous texts in film theory, and for decades we have been reading it wrong. We were taught that this is a standalone essay where the Soviet master looks at Japan and discovers the secret of cinematic montage in hieroglyphs and poetry. But that's only half the story. In fact, it's the second half of a story, the brilliant unexpected punchline to a joke most people have never heard. So what's Beyond the Shot really in the first place? It is first and foremost an answer, a solution, a stunning rebuttal. To understand it, you have to know the question it was designed to answer. And that question came from a pamphlet called Japanese Cinema, written by the critic Nikolai Kaufman. To make this video, we studied the original text of Japanese cinema, first thanks to the DeepSeek AI translation, which was the only artificial intelligence model that could translate the full text all at once when this research started around August 2025. Then only some months later, in November, we carried out a second translation using Google Gemini in its latest version. You can find both translations as well as the original Russian text in the description of this video. In 1929, Kaufman, known for his writings for the weekly film newspaper Kino, published a pamphlet with his findings on the state of Japanese film. His conclusion was shocking. More or less, quote-unquote, Japan, a culture with a profound visual tradition, has no real cinema. He argued that Japanese movies were either hopelessly theatrical, trapped in feudal samurai dramas, or shallow imitations of American comedies. They were cinematically illiterate, a disappointment. The text can be broken down into several key themes. 1. The two Japans in conflict. Kaufman portrays a Japan caught between its traditional feudal past and a modernizing, westernizing present. He sees this conflict everywhere. In the streets, he begins by describing the melody of the Japanese street, the sound of geta and zori, being overtaken by the deafening noise of European cars and trams. The Japanese evening gives way to an Europeanized day. In the cinemas, he contrasts the luxurious Western-style cinemas showing American films for the bourgeoisie with the makeshift popular theaters of the Asakusa district where the masses watch Japanese productions. In the films themselves, this is the core of his analysis. He identifies a clear taxonomy of Japanese cinema that reflects this cultural schism. Kaufman structures his critique around the three dominant genres of Japanese cinema, and in each he finds a fundamental failure. First, there are the Jidai-geki, or historical samurai films. Kaufman acknowledges their source in the rich traditions of kabuki theater and woodblock prints. But he argues that on screen this becomes a weakness, not a strength. The films are hopelessly theatrical, slavishly copying stage conventions. Worse, he claims this feudal word of honor and duty has been co-opted by the state. Films like The 47 Ronin are no longer human dramas but have become pure propaganda, preaching monarchist devotion and a blind sense of duty to serve the current imperial ideology. Then there are the Gendai-geki, or modern films. Here Kaufman finds the opposite problem. Not too much Japan, but not enough. These are what he calls 100% Americanized pictures, shallow salon dramas and sentimental comedies. They create a fantasy Japan, a world of bourgeois romance completely detached from the social realities of poverty and upheaval. For Kaufman, these films are an escapist opiate for the masses, a hollow imitation of Hollywood. Finally, he looks at the Chambara, the action-packed swordplay films. While he admits they are more dynamic and popular, he sees them as still trapped in the codes of the past. Even when an outlaw hero like Nazumi Kojo robs the rich, it is a form of spontaneous protest that ultimately changes nothing. The system and the sword that symbolizes it remains unchallenged. For Kaufman, this is the tragic paradox. Whether Japanese cinema looks backward to a corrupted feudal past or sideways to a shallow Americanized present, it fails to become cinema. It is either a slave to the theater, a slave to bourgeois ideology, or both. It possesses no unique cinematic language of its own. 2. Cinema as an instrument of propaganda. Kaufman is relentlessly critical of how the ruling class uses cinema. He details how historical films are distorted to promote monarchism and militarism, how modern films promote bourgeois values, American consumerism, and Christianity via missionary-founded films, how censorship is omnipresent, ruthlessly suppressing any dissenting or socially critical viewpoints and even enforcing moral codes, for example, denying a happy ending to a repentant debauchee. 3. The influence of Soviet cinema. Kaufman ends his pamphlet on a note of hopeful prophecy. He states that while the Japanese bourgeoisie looks to America, the Japanese intelligentsia and working class look to Soviet Russia. He writes that the Soviet film should have a huge influence on Japanese cinema, believing that its techniques and, more importantly, its drama of the collective could break the drama of individualism, egotism, and egocentrism that dominates Japanese cinema. And it is from these three ideas. First, the different Japanese realities clashing in, caught between a feudal past and a modernizing, westernizing present, and how they are represented in Japanese films. Second, ideology and politics imposed to Japanese cinema by the ruling classes of the country. And third, the possible influence that Soviet film values and techniques should have on Japanese cinema in the future. It is by those three that Kaufman arrives at his controversial, overarching conclusion: Japan has no cinema. Then came Eisenstein's epilogue Beyond the Shot. And with his dialectical approach, Eisenstein doesn't necessarily disagree with Kaufman's facts. Instead, he completely reframes the problem. He essentially says, you are looking in the wrong place. You went to the movie theaters and found nothing. However, the principles of true cinema are not in the movie theaters. They are embedded in the very DNA of Japanese culture itself. And then he takes us on a breathtaking tour to prove it. He shows us that the hieroglyph, where I plus water equals to cry, is pure intellectual montage, the juxtaposition of two images to create a concept. He shows us that the three-line haiku is a montage of shots, building a single emotional impression from separate visual fragments. He shows us that the grotesque masks of kabuki theater and the exaggerated expressions in woodblock prints are a form of montage within the shot. assembling expressive parts into a unified psychological whole. So, Beyond the Shot is not just an essay about film technique, it is a dialectical argument in action. It is Eisenstein performing the very intellectual montage he describes, taking Kaufman's thesis, no cinema, combining it with his own antithesis, nothing but cinema, to produce a powerful synthesis. The tools for a revolutionary Japanese cinema are not in Hollywood. They are buried in Japan's own past, waiting to be unlocked. Once you see this, the essay transforms. It is no longer a dry textbook chapter. It is a lively, polemical, and profoundly creative act, one half of a brilliant conversation that we, in the West, have been eavesdropping on for far too long without realizing there were two people in the room. Why this context got lost in the West? There are a few possible reasons for this separation. 1. Formalist appropriation. Western film theorists, especially in the mid-20th century, were fascinated by Eisenstein's formal innovations. It was easier to extract Beyond the Shot as a standalone treatise on montage and ignore its embeddedness in a specific political and cultural argument about Japan. 2. The Cold War. Framing Eisenstein as a pure artist and formal genius was safer than presenting him as a committed Marxist-Leninist engaged in a global ideological struggle through cultural criticism. 3. The anthology effect. Great essays often get plucked from their original context and collected in anthologies. Beyond the Shot is so brilliant on its own that it survived the process, while Kaufman's more journalistic and time-bound reportage was left behind. Why did we come to this conclusion? The analysis is primarily based on a close contextual reading of the two texts, treated as a single document, informed by the broader context of Eisenstein's non-theoretical framework. His lifelong obsession with dialectics, montage as conflict, and intellectual cinema is well documented in his other works, like Film Form, The Film Sense, his memoirs, etc. So, what have we discovered today? Well, by restoring Beyond the Shot to its original home, the pamphlet, Japanese cinema, we have done more than just correct a bibliographic error. We have restored a brilliant conversation. We have seen that Eisenstein was not just gazing at Japan from an ivory tower. He was directly engaging with Kaufman's urgent sociological critique. He was performing in the very structure of his essay the dialectical montage he so admired. The lesson here is twofold, one historical and one for us as viewers and critics today. Historically, this changes how we have read one of film theory's cornerstone texts. It is not a universal recipe for montage, but a specific politically charged argument about how a national cinema can find its own revolutionary voice by looking inward to its own cultural foundations, not outward to foreign models. For us today, it is a powerful reminder that context is everything, that great works of theory are not created in a vacuum. When we pull them out of that context, we may still get brilliant insights, but we risk missing the true point, the real passion, and the revolutionary fire that fueled them in the first place. The pamphlet Japanese Cinema is a unique document. It captures a moment where two sharp Soviet minds used the case study of Japan to passionately debate the future of cinema in itself. It is time we started listening to both voices in that conversation. Thank you for watching and joining me today. In the upcoming weeks, we are going to study the essay Beyond the Shot by Sergei Eisenstein. Please stay tuned.